I became the first person this century to complete a human-powered journey from Death Valley to Denali. I got this from Iraq with Saddam Hussein on there. You got minefields on the mountain, militia groups, and he span around with a handgun pointed right at our chests. The following day, I found myself in a skyscraper in northern Iraq, auditioning for the lead role in an Iraqi chickpea commercial. That's a true story.
Oh my God.
Hi, my name's Ollie France. I'm an expedition leader and adventurer specialising in taking people through remote and hostile places all around the world. I've brought with me a load of interesting objects which I've picked up on my travels. Every one of these has got a story for me. So I'm going to go through some of these items and just share them with you today and tell some good stories from my adventures.
Deep Extra.
So this is maybe not the most interesting object to look at, but there's definitely a story here. In 2016, I was journeying across Asia from Hong Kong to Istanbul. It was a 4-month journey, and along the way, as I hit the Uzbekistan borders Tajikistan, I was crossing from Tajikistan. Uzbekistan at the time, it's a total police state, dictatorship, very, very strict, and I knew going into this country that I was potentially going to face problems. I had lots of warnings about it. I eventually crossed the border and they did full body search. They checked every item in my bag. They took my laptop, phone, camera, went through all the files. Eventually in my rucksack, they found cocodamol tablets, which unbeknown to me are illegal narcotics in Uzbekistan. So then I'm detained as an illegal drug trafficker in one of the world's strictest police states. Dragged off to this interrogation room, held there for 4 hours. They interrogated me and asked me to sign some papers in Russian, said it would be better for me. I had no idea what these papers said, so I said, look, I'm not going to sign that. Eventually, I said, listen, I want to speak to the British Embassy. They put me in a cell overnight at the border. When I got up in the morning, they said, you've got one phone call, you've got 3 minutes. They gave me the phone. I called the British Embassy. The British Embassy said, automatic voice message, look, it's Friday, Good Friday, and we're going to be closed until the following Tuesday. Goodbye. And that was my one phone call, back to square one. They took me down to the city of Termez on the Afghan border. Then they took me for blood and urine tests to see if I still had this supposed drug in my system, and ultimately said to me, you've got two choices. It's either a $500 fine or it's 30 days in jail. And I would go for the fine option. The difficulty was they wouldn't accept Visa and MasterCard in Uzbekistan. I couldn't get my hands on the cash. I was held for 5 days as I finally managed to get hold of the cash. When I did so, they took me to an ex-KGB compound on the outskirts of Termez near the Afghan border. Because of the denomination of Uzbek currency, I mean, this here is probably worth 50p or something. $500 worth was literally a bag full of cash, which I then took to this ex-KGB compound on the outskirts of the city. By this point, I'd been traveling for 2 months across Asia, and finally, after I paid my fine, they gave me my passport back and said, okay, you can go to the airport now and leave the country. They wanted to deport me. I'm thinking, I don't really want to go home. I want to carry on this journey. This was youthful bravado, really. Fortunately, I made friends with my interpreter, and I said to him, as he was meant to take me to the airport, I said, look, I don't want to go to the airport. I want to go to the mountains. And so he whisked me off to the mountains in a taxi for 2 hours. I sort of escaped from the police by this point, but they very soon caught up with me. I was in this remote village in the mountains in Uzbekistan, and very quickly realized that I was being watched. So I had Uzbek police following me around the town. They somehow had figured out who I was, and they wanted to keep a close eye on me, spying through my hotel room window. And I got such a sense of paranoia that I ended up finding my way across the whole country. I traveled for 500 miles, changing taxis in every town. Along the way, I bumped into a guy who was identical to Cristiano Ronaldo. He must be his Uzbek cousin. And he gave me this hat, this Uzbek hat. And this was his way of trying to help me blend in with the locals, which being like a 6-foot bearded Western guy, I'm not sure it really helped.
No chance.
But anyway, after about 500 miles, changing taxis in every town, I eventually made it out into Kazakhstan. But that was a wild story on Uzbekistan.
Are you allowed back to Uzbekistan?
I've been back actually.
Oh, okay.
So I went back about 2 years later, and crucially, by this point, the previous leader called Karimov, who was, the main sort of dictator, I suppose, in the country at the time. He'd left.
Well,
So Karimov had died.
yeah,
And,
that's what they say about dictators left.
yeah, he was no longer there, and so there was a new leader in place. Apparently, he cracked down a bit on the black market and some corruption, and actually, it was fine. Although I've got to say, I was quite nervous going back. For all they knew, they'd tried to deport me, and I'd just run off and escaped. All right. So I'm often asked, what do I bring home from these expeditions? I think money is actually quite interesting because every country's got one. It's very small and light, and they're all quite interesting. So over the years, every country I've been to, I've collected at least one or two banknotes from that country. I've got another interesting one. I got this from Iraq. This is an antique Iraqi banknote with Saddam Hussein on there.
Wow.
Picked that up in Erbil. I was guiding a team. We were going out to climb the highest mountain in Iraq. But I found myself out on this remote border town in Iraq, and I was going to Rekki, the highest mountain in the country. Not so many people doing this, lots of dangers. You've got minefields on the mountain. You've got militia groups. It's close to the Iranian border, so that's quite sensitive. Lots of checkpoints. One evening, I found myself walking down this dark alley with my local fixer, guy in front of us, and he span around with a handgun pointed right at our chests. Totally out the blue, totally random. It was a shock. We were too far away to grab him, and there was nowhere to sort of hide. So we just looked at this guy, stood in shock for what felt like hours. It was seconds, really. And ultimately, he waved this gun between us and then tucked it back in his pants, smiled, and carried on walking. And myself and my fixer just looked at each other like, what has just happened? The following day, I found myself in a skyscraper in northern Iraq, auditioning for the lead role in an Iraqi chickpea commercial. That's a true story.
Oh my God. How?
We were at this restaurant and I was about to leave the country. My fixer gets a phone call and he's nodding and looking at me and nodding and smiling. And he puts down the phone and I say, well, what's that all about? He said, I've got a cousin who works in media. He knows I work with Westerners. They're casting for the lead role in this Iraqi chickpea commercial. He wants to know if I'm with any Westerners right now and if they might be interested in auditioning for the role. And I thought, this is absolute gold. So he came along, met us at the restaurant, and he said to us, look, it's a 4-part commercial. First episode, you're walking around a market, somebody's offering you chickpeas, you taste them, you're like, And I thought, I can do that. And he said, by the 4th series of this commercial, you're hosting a party, you're offering out chickpeas and all the guests are loving it. And then next thing I know, they whisk me up a skyscraper, I'm in front of a green screen, I'm auditioning for this lead role in an Iraqi chickpea commercial. It's so bizarre. They actually wanted me to do the part. By that time, I was already on the plane home, so it didn't quite work out. This is from Siberia. So I was extremely lucky to find this knife. I was doing a big solo expedition in 2020 across Lake Baikal in Siberia. Lake Baikal is the world's largest freshwater lake, 400 miles long, 1 mile deep, so large that it contains around almost a quarter of the world's fresh water, which is astonishing fact. Every winter, with its location in Siberia, the surface of this lake freezes in this incredible blue ice with cracks and bubbles. And I wanted to go out there to complete this expedition. And it's incredibly remote, particularly in the northern part of the lake. One day I was walking along, about day 10. You do get a few vehicle tracks on the lake, so you get local people going out fishing. And underneath my feet, walking along one day, listening to some music, I saw this lying on the ice, just there in front of me. Absolutely incredible. I think it's a fish knife, so it would be used for filleting fish. I think it's a walnut handle with a small engraving. I'm not sure what that says. So it's this incredible handmade knife. What I suspect happened, probably a fisherman has had it on the roof of his car after fishing out there and driven off. And so I picked it up, put it in the sled, and here it is. I was solo on the lake, so completely solo and unsupported. Everything I needed on the lake for 16 days I had within my sled. To do that, I needed to have local fixers and local information, local advice. You know, you could potentially go through this ice, you could get yourself in real trouble, it's extremely remote. And so I'd planned it really, really carefully. I've thought about every single detail. I realised that if I was to get a helicopter for a rescue, you couldn't pay by card. They would only come and rescue you if you had a big stack of Russian rubles. And the last conversation I had before stepping foot onto this ice was with a local fixer. As I was tracing my finger across the map and I got a quarter of a way through, he looked at it and said, in this region you've got thermal waters underneath the lake, and that melts the ice from below. And last year, somebody had fallen through that section of ice and been killed. And if I hadn't have spoken to him before stepping foot on the ice, I would have gone straight through that area and potentially could have gone in myself.
Yeah.
The air temperature is -20. If you go through the ice and climb out of the ice, manage to climb out on your own, which I was, everything is going to be frozen solid.